Picture the White House press briefing room in the very near future. It is March 13th, 2025. The air is thick with anticipation, the kind of heavy atmosphere that precedes a declaration of war or a national emergency. The President of the United States steps up to the podium, looks directly into the camera lens, and delivers a statement that sends shockwaves from Wall Street to Main Street, though the immediate impact isn't fully understood by the average citizen just yet. With a confident, almost dismissive wave of the hand, the President declares that the United States is closing the northern border to trade. He says, "We do not need their cars, we do not need their energy, we do not need their lumber, and we certainly do not need anything they give." He is talking about Canada. To the casual observer, this might sound like a bold negotiation tactic, a flex of American muscle, or perhaps just another day in the chaotic theater of modern politics. Many people watching at home might nod along, thinking that America is the superpower, the self-sufficient giant that sustains the world, not the other way around. They hear that statement and think, finally, we are putting America first. But I want you to pause right there and really understand what has just happened in this scenario. Most people heard a soundbite, but supply chain experts, energy economists, and national security advisors heard a death knell for the American economy as we know it. I want you to stay with me because we are going to walk through the immediate, terrifying, and cascading reality of what actually happens when the United States tries to unplug itself from its Siamese twin to the north. This is not about politics. This is about the physics of how your daily life functions. We are talking about a border that spans 5,525 miles, the longest undefended border in human history, which has become so seamless over the last century that we have forgotten it is even there. We have forgotten that it is not just a line on a map, but a complex circulatory system that keeps the American heart beating. When that declaration is made, the clock starts ticking on a catastrophe that will touch every single aspect of your life within 72 hours. This isn't hyperbole. This is logistics. Before the sun sets on that first day, the panic will begin in the energy sector. But it won't just be about the price of gas, though that is going to skyrocket. It is about the fundamental architecture of how we power our homes, build our weapons, grow our food, and drive our cars. The President, yes, claimed that America doesn't need Canada is a statement that effectively ignores 50 years of integrated infrastructure. It is like saying a human body doesn't need its left lung because the right one is bigger. Sure, you might survive for a moment, but the system is going to collapse under the strain. Today, we are going to look past the political rhetoric and dive into the cold, hard numbers, the silent machinery of interdependence that, if broken, will bring the world's largest economy to its knees faster than any foreign adversary ever could. Let's begin with the lifeblood of the American economy, oil. There is a massive misconception among the American public that because the United States is the largest oil producer in the world, we are energy independent and can simply turn off the tap from imports. This is a dangerous oversimplification that ignores the chemistry of crude oil and the specific engineering of American refineries. In 2024, the United States imported approximately 4.3 million barrels of crude oil from Canada every single day. That accounts for 63% of all U.S. crude oil imports. But why do we import so much if we produce so much? The answer lies in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast. The massive refineries that line the coasts of Texas and Louisiana, as well as those in the industrial heartland of Illinois and Ohio, were specifically designed and retooled decades ago to process heavy, sour crude oil. This is the thick, sulfur-rich oil that comes from the Canadian oil sands. The oil that booms out of the Permian Basin in Texas is largely light, sweet crude. It is high quality, but you cannot simply pour light, sweet crude into a refinery built for heavy, sour crude and expect it to work. It requires a completely different chemical cracking process, reconfiguring these massive industrial cathedrals to run solely on American light. Crude would take years and cost tens of billions of dollars. In the meantime, if you cut off that Canadian pipeline flow, refineries like Marathon Petroleum's Robinson Refinery in Illinois, which runs on 100% Alberta crude, would essentially go dark. They wouldn't just slow down, they would stop. We are talking about a supply shock that would remove millions of barrels of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel from the U.S. market overnight. Energy economists estimate that losing Canadian crude would push gasoline prices up by 30 to 70 cents per gallon within weeks. And that is a conservative estimate that does not account for the panic buying and speculation that would inevitably flood the market. We are looking at $5, $6, maybe $7 gas across the Midwest, not because of a war in the Middle East, but because of a policy decision in Washington. But the energy crisis goes deeper than just what you put in your gas tank. Let's talk about the invisible crisis that would hit your home. Electricity and natural gas. The North American energy grid is not separated by national borders. It is a single breathing machine. There are over 86 transmission lines that cross the U.S.-Canada border, moving electrons back and forth to balance the grid. In the Northeast, states like New York and regions like New England are heavily dependent on Canadian hydropower. This is clean, reliable baseload power that keeps the lights on from Buffalo to Boston. If you sever that connection, you're not just losing a little bit of power, you are destabilizing the entire grid. During a polar vortex or a summer heat wave, that Canadian power is the difference between a functioning air conditioner and a rolling blackout. Furthermore, consider natural gas. In 2024, the US imported 8.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas from Canada every day. This gas heats homes in the freezing winters of Minnesota and North Dakota. It powers industrial furnaces in the Rust Belt. The infrastructure to move this gas, the pipelines, the compression stations, has been built over generations based on the assumption that gas flows north to south. You cannot simply reverse the flow or build new pipelines overnight. If that supply is cut, we are talking about Americans freezing in their homes. We are talking about factories shutting down because they cannot generate the heat required for manufacturing. The irony here is palpable. And while politicians talk about energy dominance, the reality is that the US grid and the Canadian grid are like two climbers roped together on a mountain. If one decides to cut the rope, both are at risk of falling. Now, let us shift gears to something that most Americans have never thought about, but that underpins our entire modern existence: critical minerals. The United States government has identified a list of 50 minerals that are deemed critical to national security and economic prosperity. These are the building blocks of everything from your iPhone to the guidance systems on a Tomahawk missile. The uncomfortable truth is that the United States is 100% import reliant for 12 of these minerals, and more than 50% reliant for another 29. Who is the reliable supplier next door that prevents us from being entirely dependent on adversaries like China? Canada. Canada is a mining superpower. It supplies the vast majority of the potash used in American agriculture. Let's break that down. Potash is fertilizer. Without Canadian potash, the cost of farming corn, wheat, and soy in the American Midwest skyrockets. Yields would drop. This means that a trade war with Canada isn't just an industrial problem, it is a kitchen table problem. It means higher prices for bread, for meat, for milk, and for everything in the grocery store. Then there is uranium. Canada is one of the world's largest producers of uranium, which fuels the American nuclear fleet. Nuclear power provides nearly 20% of American electricity. Disrupting that supply chain introduces a level of vulnerability into the U.S. power grid that is frankly unacceptable to anyone who studies energy security. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect for the Pentagon is the issue of rare earth elements and defense materials. We are talking about metals like scandium, tellurium, and the various elements required to manufacture high-performance magnets. These magnets are not just for refrigerator doors. They are essential for the actuators in the F-35 fighter jet, for the electric motors in nuclear submarines, and for the guidance fins on precision munitions. Currently, China dominates the global processing of these minerals. The entire U.S. strategy to decouple from China relies on building a North American supply chain where Canada mines the raw materials and the U.S. and Canada work together to process them. If you declare economic war on Canada, you are effectively torpedoing the only viable strategy the U.S. has to reduce its reliance on Beijing. You are handing a geopolitical victory to your primary adversary in the name of America First. Let's move to the sector that defines the American middle class, the automotive industry. There's no such thing as an American car or a Canadian car anymore. There are only North American cars. The integration is so deep that it is molecular. A single vehicle component, say a transmission part or a seat frame, might cross the border 6 or 7 times during the manufacturing process before it is installed in a finished vehicle. Raw steel from Hamilton, Ontario might go to Detroit for stamping, back to Windsor for assembly into a subcomponent, then to Ohio for painting, and finally to an assembly plant in Kentucky. This system, known as just-in-time manufacturing, relies on the seamless, frictionless movement of goods across the border. If you impose tariffs, or worse, close the border, you're throwing a wrench into a gearbox that is spinning at 5,000 RPM. We saw a preview of this in 2022 during the bridge blockades. Within days, Ford, Toyota, and General Motors had to shut down plants in the US because they ran out of parts. They didn't have weeks of inventory, they had hours. If the president creates a permanent disruption, we aren't talking about cars getting a little more expensive. We are talking about the complete paralysis of the US auto industry. Hundreds of thousands of auto workers in Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, and Alabama would be sent home. The ripple effect would be devastating. Local suppliers, diners near the factories, trucking companies, entire communities would be hollowed out. And for the consumer, you would see a shortage of new vehicles and a spike in used car prices that would make the post-pandemic inflation look mild. What makes this situation even more precarious is the political reaction from Canada. There is an assumption in Washington that Canada will always roll over, that they have no choice but to accept whatever terms the U.S. dictates because their economy is smaller. This is a grave miscalculation. The current rhetoric coming from the U.S., threats of tariffs, insults to leadership, and loose talk about annexation, has fundamentally shifted the Canadian psyche. Polls show that 90% of Canadians oppose any form of deep political integration or annexation by the U.S. In fact, over 80% said they would rather revert to being a dominion of the British Empire than join the United States. That is a staggering rejection of the American brand. Canadian politicians, from the Liberals to the Conservatives, are now united in a stance of defiance. They are actively looking to diversify away from the U.S. In early 2025, we are already seeing the numbers shift. Canadian exports to the U.S. dropped by over 4%, while their exports to other global markets are growing. They are looking to Europe, they are looking to Asia, and they are looking inward. If Canada decides to play hardball, they have leverage too. They can restrict the flow of electricity to New York. They can prioritize critical minerals for their own domestic industries or for partners in Europe. They can impose retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural goods, hurting farmers in key swing states. A trade war is a two-way street, and in a relationship this integrated, both sides get run over.